Hello there, welcome to Supply Watch. This program is dedicated to providing you with the latest in the world of supply chain in Africa and across the world. Here is what is lying ahead. Kenya's blackout. Kenya dark for 4 hours on Tuesday. I have the latest details. ECOWAS sanctions Mali. Mali is now isolated. It cannot access both ports on air and land. How are they coping? Kenya Railways test the movement of cargo from Mombasa to Malaba. Great news for businesses in Uganda and beyond. It will cut down the transport time from 96 hours to just 36 hours. Kisumu's maiden cargo flight. On Saturday, Kisumu reopened its airport for cargo transportation after 13 years. What does this mean for agriculture? Omicron, trade war between China and the US, economic nationalism and elections in Kenya, Senegal and Angola are predicted to affect the supply chain in 2022. I speak to supply chain expert Josephat Ngesa and Amina Imam. I'm Mono Njuguna. Welcome to the program. Let us start in Kenya, where Kenya Power and Lighting Company KPLC restored power to majority of the country after a third nationwide blackout in 4 years on Tuesday. The power outage resulted in losses in the millions for businesses like manufacturing, welding and salons that are dependent on electricity. Kenya Power and Lighting Company attributed the blackout to collapse of towers supporting a high voltage power line linking Nairobi to the Kiambere hydroelectric dam. Meanwhile, Kenyans will soon feel relief as prices of commodities is set to drop following the adjustments in energy prices. The energy regulator announced commercial and industrial consumers whose consumption exceeds 15,000 units will pay an energy charge of 8.70 shillings and 4.35 shillings per unit of supply metered during off-peak hours on top of the demand charge of 800 shillings per kilovolt. According to the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, the cost of producing goods is set to reduce between 2.67 shillings and 3.64 shillings per unit of electricity dedicated by respective tariffs and consumption levels. Very good news there for Kenyans. At the same time, reports in Mali are indicating a state of panic and anger as people scramble to buy in bulk after ECOWAS nations on Sunday voted to leave Mali isolated. The West African trade bloc, ECOWAS, announced a raft of sanctions, including the closure of members' land and air borders with Mali, the suspension of non-essential financial transactions, the freezing of Mali state assets in ECOWAS commercial banks, and recalling the ambassadors from Bamako. Meanwhile, Regional Monetary Union UMOA instructed all financial institutions under its umbrella to suspend Mali with immediate effect, severing the country's access to regional financial markets. The sanctions followed an announcement by the military government in Mali to push elections slated for February this year to December 2025. Military Commander Assimi Goïta declared himself president of Mali after 2 successful coups in 2020, and his government vowed to close its side of the border with ECOWAS member states, recall its ambassadors, and reserve the right to consider its membership in ECOWAS and UMOA following the sanctions. There is no telling what socio-economic impact the sanctions will have, but experts are warning the landlocked country will have trouble importing goods and prices of commodities are expected to soar. Let's go back to Kenya now, where on Monday, Kenya Railway Authority took a huge step towards easing the movement of cargo from the port of Mombasa to Uganda and beyond with a successful fast trial train carrying cargo from Mombasa via the standard gauge railway line, then to the meter gauge railway line for onward transportation to Malaba. The transshipment took place at Naivasha Inland Container Depot, headed for Malaba Railway Yard. Transporting cargo through the railway will save businesses time and money, as transportation time is reduced by 6 hours from the current 96 hours to 36 hours. Similarly, it will cost $860 per 20-foot container compared to road, which cost $2,032 per 20-foot container. At the same time, Kenya Railways and the Kenya Tea Development Agency, KTDA, last week entered into a partnership which will see KTDA managed factories transport their produce via the standard gauge railway line from Nairobi to the port of Mombasa for onward export. KTDA, that exports upwards of 300 million kilograms of processed tea annually, praised the move, saying it will help save costs as the tea exports seek to streamline its operations. The maiden trip from the partnership saw KTDA transport 31 containers of packed tea worth about 800 tons via the standard gauge railway. According to the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, KNBS, of course, the passenger and cargo trains generated about 8 billion shillings in the year ending June 2021, up from 6 billion in a similar period last year. The cargo trains accounted for the biggest chunk of the revenue increase in the period at 1.5 billion shillings, while the passenger service posted a growth of 470 million shillings. Let's move to Kisumu now, where after 13-year wait, the Kisumu International Airport recorded the first export cargo flight carrying fresh produce from the Lake region to the United Kingdom. Kenya Airways plane carried 16 tons of fresh chilies produced from the region, as the national carrier said they are ready to lift up to 45 tons of fresh produce from the airport. Kakamega Governor and Lake Region Economic Bloc Chairman Wycliffe Oparanya and Kisumu Governor Anyang' Nyong'o presided over the historic event, while urging the 14 member counties to invest more in agriculture to benefit from the direct exports. This comes even as the Ministry of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing, Urban Development and Public Works commits 1.2 billion shillings for the upgrade of the passenger capacity of the airport from the current 500,000 to about 1 million in time for the Afri-Cities Summit set for February this year. Now, supply chains in Africa and globally have faced several challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic, forcing radical changes. Earlier in the week, I spoke to supply chain expert with over 17 years worth of experience, Nigerian Amina Imam, and I started by asking what impact COVID-19 has had on supply chains in Africa.
The impact has been both negative and positive because COVID-19 has impacted every aspect of supply chain: food, manufacturing, retail, health. But in some ways, it has not created an overwhelming problem, but rather it has exposed the weakness that we have in the supply chain in Africa here. So while there are negatives, which includes things like death, damage to our health, the economy, and even strain on our healthcare systems, ones who have benefited is the pharmaceuticals, because there's been increased demand for various drugs and PPEs, right? But I know the OECD mentioned that the impact will soon become social and an economic emergency. Now, why is that? It's due to the continental shock, supply shock, which is affecting domestic and intra-African trade, lockdowns in Europe and OECD countries, and lower trade and investment from China.
I also asked what lessons supply chain experts have learned.
We need to have a supply chain strategy that is resilient, which will be detrimental, because if you don't have a strategy that is resilient, it's detrimental to operations. Another key factor we need to look at is redesign our ports and shipping infrastructure to embrace the ongoing and future opportunities. Now, this is because cargoes and shipping containers are tied up, creating continuous bottlenecks in the system.
So as we note down our expectations for the year 2022, we evaluate some of the things that will be pivotal to Africa's supply chain in 2022. The supremacy battle between China and the United States is one to keep a close eye on. African countries are huge beneficiaries of loans from China, while the US has been a long-time ally to many African nations with billions of dollars in aid and direct investment. Africa's supply chain also had to contend with the age-old problem: instability, from Ethiopia's civil war that has left hundreds displaced to Guinea's coup and the latest resignation of Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok following mass protests. Supply chains must find ways of distributing products among flying bullets and high tension. Here is Joseph Ngesa.
I think it's a high time this vicious cycle was reversed, because you see, conflict leads to poverty and poverty leads to conflict. Okay, and business requires a stable environment. So when you have war, there's no production. In any case, there's a lot of migration because of war. When people are migrating, that's labor that's being underutilized or not used at all. Okay, and therefore, when there's no production, we are exacerbating the state of poverty in Africa. Okay, and therefore, the GDPs of these countries continue to diminish because of the wars. Okay, and what happens is that now the little income they have, they spend on arms. Okay, and therefore, little is actually directed towards investment. And without investment, there's no employment. And without employment, there's no consumption. Okay? And therefore, even the taxation is not there. And if you can't get taxation, that means you cannot run a government.
Now let's cross over to Uganda, that has set some of the toughest measures to deal with COVID-19 and reopened pre-primary, primary and secondary schools this week. President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni announced the easing of COVID-19 containment measures in December as the East African country looks to reopen its economy. Bars and nightclubs will also be opened and night curfew lifted 2 weeks after schools have resumed. Movie theaters and sporting events will also resume, of course, after the schools are reopened. Uganda's government expressed optimism in the rising numbers of vaccination, and despite recording nearly 3,300 deaths, it's now mandatory to be fully vaccinated before using public service vehicles. Earlier, I spoke to the Executive Director of African Institute for Investigative Journalism, Solomon Serwanja, and I started by asking him what the mood is like in Uganda.
Excited, but these 2 years have really been a loss. I've told you a story of my lastborn, my second lastborn, Upendo. The brother is Imani, and Imani is in P3, in P2. He was in P2 before the lockdown, right? Upendo was in nursery. Now, Upendo was being homeschooled. We took her, she did an interview in P1, and she passed. So she was admitted in the same school like the brother. Upendo is in P1, Imani is in P2. And so last night, Imani was saying, so Daddy, am I going to stay in P2? And I'm telling him, you know what, government is going to guide, but maybe there's going to be an automatic promotion. It's crazy here. It's a story to watch, and it's an experience here in Uganda.
Solomon also insists investigative journalists must do their best to assess the use of COVID-19 funds.
I think that we have seen what I can describe as a COVID-19 money heist. Not only here in Uganda, but also in Kenya. It has been reported in South Africa, in Nigeria, everywhere. There are people out there who are taking advantage of the moment to actually steal as much money as they can out of this pandemic, which is really bad. I think that the role of investigative journalism now is more than ever needed to unearth how some people have been stealing money.
So that's it from our desk this week. For more news and updates, visit our website www.supplychainafricanews.com. You can watch and subscribe on our YouTube channel at Supply Chain Africa News. Sir Winston Churchill once said, "Let our advanced worrying become advanced thinking and planning." From me, Monwanjiguna, and the rest of the team, goodbye for now.